Pleased to call to order this important meeting with appreciation to our chair, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, who will preside over today's presentations. I'm also pleased to be joined by the chair of our caucus, Congressman John Larson of Connecticut, and the ranking member on the Natural Resources Committee, Congressman Ed Markey, former chair of the Energy Security Select Committee. Also pleased to be joined by Congressman Cicilline of Rhode Island, Congresswoman Donna Edwards of Maryland, her chairman Sandy Levin of the Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia, and also from Virginia, Mr. Moran. When I think about today's proceedings, one title in my mind I give it is the agony and the ecstasy. The agony of our consumers for the price at the pump, and what that means to them, especially people who are having trouble making ends meet, and how the high cost at the pump is really an obstacle to them. It's not just a luxury, it's something they must do, and they have to make ends meet. The agony is for them. The ecstasy is for big oil. They raked in a record profit of $137 billion in profits last year. That's $261,000 a minute. And they're on track for another year of astronomical profits. Experts have been clear. Wall Street speculators are artificially driving up the price at the pump and causing pain to millions of American consumers. We'll hear more about that from our expert witnesses and from our colleagues. Now I thank my colleagues for joining us. Appreciate the presence of Professor Greensberger and Mr. Guilford, and yield to the distinguished chairwoman of the steering committee.
Thank you, Madam Leader, and I want to as well welcome everyone here today. It's a privilege to do that, and I thank you, Madam Leader, for calling the hearing, and a welcome to my colleagues on the panel this afternoon. High oil prices, as the leader pointed out, affect every aspect of Americans' lives, not just the cost of traveling, but of heating homes, food, and other purchases. There are many reasons for fluctuation in the price of oil. On some of these, such as tension and uncertainty in the Middle East, the administration is moving forward by working with the international community. As a result, last week, Saudi Arabia announced that they would act to lower oil prices. That being said, the cost of gas is also irrefutably affected by rampant speculation in the oil market, and that is something that we can and should do more about. Last year, at the peak of the last oil price bubble, Goldman Sachs estimated that speculators increased crude prices by around 20%, and the price of gas by 56 cents per gallon. Even the head of ExxonMobil conceded that the price of oil should have been in, and I quote, the $60 to $70 range, when instead it hovered at $100 a barrel. It has been estimated that speculators now make up as much as 70 to 80% of the oil market. So we are holding this hearing to examine how we can do a better job of curbing excessive speculation in the oil market. Dodd-Frank legislation gave the CFTC broad new authorities to investigate manipulation in the market. And last year, the Commodities Trade Commission charged 5 oil speculators with manipulating the crude prices in 2008, netting them more than $50 million, even as oil prices climbed toward record highs. But this House Republican majority has tried to gut the CFTC at every turn. The Agricultural Appropriations Bill last year, where the funding for the Commodities Future Trading Commission is determined, provided only $172 million in funding, about 44% below the president's request, meaning that it's about 159 less cops on the beat. We fought back. We got that up to $205 million in the final 2012 budget, but it is still not enough for the CFTC to perform as it should. Their request was for $308 million. We are here to represent American consumers, not oil speculators. We need to ensure that the CFTC has the resources it needs to do its job and is doing it. And we should be strengthening its ability to combat rampant speculation, not working to undermine it. I've introduced legislation with Congressman Boswell and Welsh to provide the CFTC with a reliable source of funding, the Wall Street accountability through sustainable Reliable Funding Act. This will bring the CFTC in line with other federal financial regulators like FERC, the SEC, the FCC, and the FDIC, and authorize the collection of user fees to offset the cost of their operations. In order to decrease prices immediately, I and several of my colleagues have asked the President to release some oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Right now, the Petroleum Reserve holds 696 million barrels and is filled to more than 95% of its capacity. And as presidents on both sides of the aisle who have tapped the reserve can attest, even releasing a small amount of oil from the reserve can have a huge impact on the price of gas and help to discourage speculation. Today, I hope we can discuss the best ways to continue moving forward against excessive speculation. Last month, President Obama reconstituted the Oil and Gas Price Working Group to investigate manipulation in the oil and gas markets. What should this working group be doing to make a difference? And do the current market conditions warrant the use of the CFTC's emergency authority to set margins and position limits? The CFTC has had this authority from the beginning of its existence, but has refrained from getting involved since 1980. Those questions and others I know our panel is going to address. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to our discussion today. With that, let me yield time to my colleague from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman DeLauro. Thank you for holding this. Thank you, Leader Pelosi, for conducting this very important hearing at this time. Thank you, Chairman Larson, very much for convening this. I think we're at a very important moment in the United States relationship with the oil marketplace. Right now, the national average for the price of gasoline stands at $3.93 a gallon nationwide. Within the next week, the average American driver could be staring through the windshield at $4 a gallon. Of course, the Republicans would like you to think that this is all President Obama's fault and deflect any blame away from the real culprits. They are wrong. The current spike in gas prices is not about Obama. It's about OPEC, oil companies, and Wall Street speculators. We could take 4 steps right now that could address this situation. 1, deploy oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, as Rosa DeLauro said. Last week, when the French government said that international talks with the United States and others were proceeding to deploy the reserves, oil dipped by several dollars just on the mere threat of using this weapon against speculators. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is to Wall Street speculators what kryptonite is to Superman. And Republicans oppose this uniformly. They believe that the oil market is a free market. It is not. 2, we need to stop Wall Street speculators from their yearly gains that turn the oil market into a crude oil casino. Last year, House Republicans tried to slash the budget for the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, the agency that serves as the cop on the Wall Street oil speculation beat. And the Republican majority has moved legislation intended to delay the reforms by the Democratic Congress that would diminish the power of Wall Street trading firms to manipulate the market. Wall Street's lobbyists have even gone so far as to sue to block these reforms. We should be fully arming the Wall Street cops and ensure that they can crack down on the gasoline gamblers in the marketplace. The Republicans are wrong. 3, we should end the needless exportation of American energy resources. Last year, America's #1 export of any kind was our fuel. More than 1 billion barrels of our gasoline, diesel, and other fuels worth more than $100 billion were sent overseas to locations like China, Morocco, and Singapore. With Rush Holt and Congressman Bill Owens from New York, I have introduced legislation that would stop the export of America's oil and fuel produced from public lands. When American families are facing $4 gasoline, we should not be allowing big oil to continue to export America's fuel that was drilled for here. And the Republicans oppose this amendment almost unanimously. And 4, we must end the tax breaks for oil companies. Republicans want to raise taxes on the wind industry, but they have been protecting tax subsidies for the most profitable oil companies in the world. American taxpayers should not be asked to give oil companies 100-year-old subsidies so they can sell us oil at more than $100 a barrel and then make more than $100 billion in annual profits. We should be pushing a long-term plan that moves us away from foreign oil and insulates us from the price shocks of an oil market that is controlled by OPEC. If we take these 4 steps, we will stop the speculators from manipulating the oil market, we will rein in the fuel exporters who are sending our resources to China, and we will tell the OPEC dictators that we don't need their oil any more than we need their sand. Thank you, Chairman DeLauro, for this wonderful hearing today.
I want to thank you, Mr. Markey. With that, let me introduce our colleague, Mr. Larson, to introduce one of our guests this morning, this afternoon.
Thank you, Chairwoman DeLauro, for convening us here today. I want to commend our leader, Nancy Pelosi, for recognizing what Americans have all across this country, the problems that they're encountering at the pump and, frankly, in home heating oil and air conditioning as we approach the summer. It's my great honor to be able to introduce Jean Guilford today. Jean Guilford is the president of the Independent Connecticut Petroleum Association and Education Foundation. I've had the opportunity to work with Gene over the years and a number of his dealers who understand implicitly that the laws of supply and demand have been suspended when it comes to oil speculation. And they have been in the forefront of helping us shape legislation for both Congresswoman DeLauro and myself. And I am proud to be able to introduce him here today. Gene has an extensive background, and I think the members will find this most interesting, that Gene was appointed by President Reagan and served both in the Commerce Department, is very familiar with import and export of our commodities, and also served in the Energy Department as well, and so has first-hand understanding of both the regulation that's needed and also of our marketplace system. But most importantly, what he understands is the need of consumers. And at a recent press conference with Chris Murphy and myself, laid out for the public what I think is the best case in terms of the need for us to have ongoing regulation and promotion of the CFTC and the Dodd-Frank bill. And with that, my proud opportunity to introduce Jean Guilford.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our other panelist, Michael Greensberger, who is currently the professor at the Center of Health and Homeland Security at the University of Maryland Law School. Michael has worn many hats over the years, from acting as a principal deputy associate attorney general at the Justice Department to technical advisor to the UN Commission of Experts on Reforms of the International Financial System. He also previously served as director of the Trading and Markets Division at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and he served on the steering committee of the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, and as a member of the International Organization of Security Commission's Hedge Fund Task Force. Thank you, Michael, for being here as well, Mr. Guilford. And Michael, we'll start with your testimony.
Thank you very much.
And Chairwoman Rosa DeLauro for convening this hearing. I've worked with almost everybody in this meeting, and you've all been great friends of consumers, and you've always lended an ear to those of us who don't have the clout of the big Wall Street lobbyists. Many say there's no quick fix for this. I believe there is a quick fix for this, and I agree with many of the policy proposals that have been enunciated, but I would prioritize 3 of them. But first, let me say, yesterday I read the Financial Times, which surveys all the world's markets, and within an opinion column, the thesis was the United States is back. The United States is back leading the world economy. Europe is on its back. Japan has been on its back. China is decelerating. Our policies, which have been guided by the Obama administration and you in Congress, have created the embers that are sparking a recovery. The one thing that will damage this recovery is the ever-accelerating gasoline prices. They are a burden in a micro sense in that people simply do not have the money to pay for $4 and maybe soon $5 a gallon gasoline. It is a hardship to virtually every American. But the more important in a macro sense is this will break the back of the recovery. The President has said that. Many of you have said that. With everything going so well for us, why can't we fix this problem? Many would like you to believe, and you've said this is a supply-demand problem, but I've cited in my testimony 60 experts from around the world who say supply-demand is in equilibrium. The Saudi king just said he would increase oil production by 25% to make up for any boycott of the Iranian oil product or interference with the Straits of Hormuz. The President has talked about releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. But as was said in the testimony, the chairman of ExxonMobil has said market fundamentals mean that oil prices should be at $60 to $70. They're now approaching 105. They've been up to 110. Why is this happening if there is no supply-demand problem? And I would say, do not believe those who tell you, in the face of the experts, in the face of the Saudi king, in the face of the chairman of ExxonMobil, that there's a supply-demand problem. What is the problem? It is gambling by Wall Street on the price of oil. It is similar to the gambling Wall Street did on whether or not people would pay their subprime mortgages in the mortgage meltdown. They couldn't pay off their bets, and all of us were forced as taxpayers to pay trillions of dollars to make up for Wall Street's bets that the subprime market would be successful. Now they are betting on the upward direction of the price of oil. And again, 60 experts in my testimony have said, from Nouriel Roubini, who famously predicted the meltdown, Iranian oil experts, Stanford, Princeton, MIT, London School of Economics, it is excessive speculation, which is a fancy word for saying that gamblers wearing Wall Street suits have taken these markets over and are controlling the price and create investment vehicles that are designed to push the price of oil up. By gambling, by placing a bet, you do not increase oil production. You do not create market liquidity. It's just like saying, does Las Vegas create national economic well-being? We have a Las Vegas exponentially on steroids making bets on the upward direction of oil. Now, Dodd-Frank with your leadership, made a valiant attempt to deal with this, but we were too kind in the way we dealt with it in Dodd-Frank because we delegated out the responsibility to the administrative process, which is overwhelmed with under-the-radar screen, Wall Street, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, millions of dollars of lobbying. I have 3 recommendations for Congress, and let me say that under your leadership, there have been bills that have passed in this direction. Leader Pelosi, when you were the Speaker, you and Congresswoman DeLauro, Congresswoman Larson, Mr. Peterson, on June 26 introduced a bill to stop speculation. June 26, 2008, in the morning, it passed the House 402 to 19 that night. When oil goes over $4 nationwide, this will be a bipartisan issue. And it must be explained that this is not a supply problem. The President just said last week we can constrain the Iranians' oil production because, as he has said, as the Saudis have said, as ExxonMobil has said, supply is plentiful. We are now a net exporter of oil. It's the gambling that must be stopped. Here are my three things. The investment vehicles that have the fancy names of commodity index swaps and synthetic exchange-traded funds, much like the naked credit default swaps that led to the meltdown that Wall Street propagated as investments, but were really bets on whether subprime mortgages would be paid off, are $500 billion of investments sending signals to the market, false signals, that there is a supply problem. And anybody who knows these markets and is objective says that those false signals are damaging the supply fundamentals in this market. That gambling must be stopped. It will not have anything to do with production. None of that money goes to production. None of it goes to liquidity. It's all casino gambling and nothing productive. Second, the president now has twice wisely said and correctly said that it is not a supply-demand problem, but there are manipulations in the markets by big financial traders where they're conspiring to drive the price of oil up. He has twice asked the Justice Department to convene a prosecutorial investigation. Now, he did that first on April 21st, 2011. Oil was at 110. After he made that announcement, within 6 months, it was at 75. But nothing happened. Now it's back at 110 again. Now the president has asked for this task force. I think all of us, and I know Congressman Van Hollen is gathering a letter, all of us have to work with the Department of Justice, who is leading this task force, to explain to them that manipulation of the oil markets is not only crippling the American consumer, but it threatens the recovery. And if we go back into recession, there's going to be no safety net. There's going to be no TARP the next time. The American people don't have the stomach for bailing out banks. And if we don't have a safety net, that means not a recession, but a depression. So I think we all have to explain to the Attorney General that this has got to be his #1 investigative process. Where is the FBI? Where are the interviews of market participants? Where are the subpoenas? President Obama has focused on this. Let's get these guys going. And I assure you, because the president's threat in April of 2011 drove the price down almost $40. If there is a real investigation, just the appearance of it will cause these cockroaches to scatter because the light will be turned on. They don't want to go to jail. And if they think they're not going to go to jail, they are going to keep damaging the American economy. Finally, you said this, and this may be the hardest thing to do, that the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, probably few of them know what that is the cop on the beat that can stop this problem. Under the leadership of Chairman Gensler, appointed by President Obama, they have done an amazing job, but they are completely underfunded. For a multi-trillion-dollar market, they have 700 employees. The president asked for another 400 employees, another $100 million. $100 million to stop the economy spinning into a depression. That's a very small amount of money. The CFTC has to be fully funded. If they're fully funded, we don't need interagency task force. They would have the resources to bring these manipulation cases. They are bringing manipulation cases, but they don't have the FBI. They don't have the necessary investigative power. We need to fund that agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Greenberger. Mr. Guilford?
Good afternoon. Leader Pelosi, Congressman Larson, Congressman DeLauro, my two close friends from Connecticut, thank you for being here, and members of the Democratic Policy and Steering Committee. I am the man who came from Connecticut to say about Professor Greenberger, I agree. Let me very briefly take you through what I believe to be an important part of the history of what we've been going through, because it was in 2004 that we first came and visited Congressman Larson and asked if he would be willing to join with his colleagues in initiating a government accountability study of the authorities of the CFTC and find out what is going on in commodity markets. Because it was by then that we were becoming very unsettled and concerned about what was going on in those markets, the volatility and price increases. And it was about 2 years later, Congressman Larson, that we got the report back that said, well, we think that there's something going on and we think this is very important, but we can't really tell you because the law effectively has blinded the agencies who are responsible for enforcing these laws. And then in 2008, Leader Pelosi, we came very close in closing the Enron loophole and being able to move this issue a little further down the road. And you remember 2008 very well because it was an experience that we certainly won't forget, because it was at that time that the Secretary of the Treasury and the Chairman of the Federal Reserve came to you and said, if you don't pass a piece of legislation in a couple of days, the American economy is going to go over the edge. And it was on the basis of the reason why that was the case, Wall Street's reckless and irresponsible behavior that led to that point, that we ended up moving the policy a little further down the road with Dodd-Frank. Now, where we are today with respect to connecting the dots between Wall Street and the gas pump is, for us, very clear. And I'd like to illustrate that to you in the material that I've handed out to you. The Wall Street NYMEX gasoline contract has increased 86 cents a gallon in the last 90 days. Since mid-December, 86 cents more per gallon means that our state of Connecticut pays $3.6 million more per day every day for gasoline. That's $25 million a week that the citizens of Connecticut pay more for gasoline today than they did in the middle of December. Now, to put that into context, for the charts that we've provided to you, and now we're up to 92 cents by virtue of the fact that we had a 6.6 cent increase just the other night after I had prepared this for delivery here today. At 11 billion gallons a month that Americans consume in gasoline, Americans today are paying $10 billion more for gasoline than they were paying in the middle of December. So in the context of Professor Greensberger's statements with regard to how much we should be arguing about funding an agency of the federal government for the purposes of overseeing these markets, if it's costing the American consumer this amount of money just within the scope of 90 days, 90 days, it's extraordinary. Now, what could possibly have happened in the last 90 days to have caused this problem? Did hurricanes go through the Gulf of Mexico? Was there a massive shutdown of refineries around the world? Did Israel attack Iran? In the absence of anything that anyone can point to, a tax on the American public of $10 billion per month has been enacted as the result of what has gone on Wall Street just since the middle of December. And with due respect to anyone who chooses to blame this all on India and China, we didn't just discover India and China the week before Christmas. But that's what's happened just since the middle of December. Our contention is that financial industry speculators have overtaken the commodity markets. 10 years ago, actual producers and users of energy and agricultural commodities made up 70 to 80% of the markets, with only 20 to 30% of the markets made up by speculators. Now this has flipped, and 70 to 80% of the commodity markets are controlled by financial industry speculators, and only 20 to 30% of these markets are actual legitimate hedgers of purchases of energy and agricultural commodities. 6 years ago, Wall Street brought out commodity index funds, resulting in upwards of $400 billion of strictly speculative investments in commodity markets, and that is contributing to the rise in food and energy prices. And if I could, I'd like to read you some of the promotional material for Wall Street for these commodity index funds. Quote, "When trading futures, you never actually buy or sell anything tangible. You are just contracting to do so at a future date. You are merely taking a buying or selling position as a speculator, expecting to profit from rising or falling prices. You have no intention of making or taking delivery of the commodity you are trading." Let me repeat that. This comes from the people who sell these things. you have no intention of making or taking delivery of the commodity you are trading, your only goal is to buy low and sell high, or vice versa. Before the contract expires, you will need to relieve your contractual obligation, which is where we get into the business of rolling contracts month to month, to take or make delivery by offsetting your initial position. The commodity markets are overseen by the CFTC, as you all know, and you've stated here today, who put in place position limits regulations shortly after the first of the year to restrain the strictly financial speculation in these markets. And the financial services industry, as you know, in the 8th of December, has filed suit against the CFTC in federal court, saying that these massive price increases, they don't believe that these rules are necessary or appropriate. To the Americans who are paying $10 billion a month more for gasoline, tell them these rules are not necessary. The financial services industry drove America nearly into another Great Depression in 2008, from which we are only now beginning to emerge. Congress passed the Dodd-Frank law to regulate the reckless and irresponsible behavior of Wall Street, and that law and all of the agencies responsible for implementing that law need to be strongly supported. And the law needs to be allowed to work for the American people, especially before it's tinkered with any further. And in the two charts that I provided you, which I'd like to briefly cover, because there are some excuses going around that this increase in gasoline prices is all due to crude oil. Well, if you look at the price of crude oil between mid-December and the middle of March, it went from $94 a barrel to $106. It's $12 a barrel increase. 42 gallons in a barrel, so for every dollar increase in a barrel, that yields approximately 2 cents a gallon increase in refined products. 12 bucks, 24 cents. Flip over to the next chart, and you'll see what happened between the middle of December and March 28th. Went from $2.48 to $3.40 in just over 90 days. If the increased price of crude added 24 cents a gallon to gasoline, then where did the other 68 cents a gallon come from? What caused the other 68 cents a gallon to be added to the cost of a gallon of gasoline on the New York Mercantile Exchange gasoline contract? That's the contract. It's gone up every single day, steadily every day since the middle of December. Not before December, but since the middle of December. Personally, with regard to the 28 commodities that are covered by the Commodities Futures Trading Commission's position limits rule, we think it's not only time to give consideration to making sure that those rules go into effect, but we also think that the energy and agricultural commodities are so important to the people of this country that they should become 100% deliverable. And that is to say, we don't find any reason why this game of Wall Street placing bets on the movements of these products. You have no intention of making or taking delivery of the commodity you are trading. If you have no intention of taking or making delivery of the commodity you are trading, you shouldn't be allowed to participate in the market. Because what we're talking about here is the food that Americans buy and the energy that we rely on to run our economy. As others have said today, we strongly support adequate funding for the Commodities Futures Trading Commission and reject proposals to cut their funding, which only guts the agency's ability to enforce these laws. We support the efforts of the House Agriculture Committee to initiate hearings immediately on the role of excessive Wall Street speculation is having on gasoline and energy and food prices. Remember, the 28 commodities covered by the position limits rule is energy and food. And we also further support the revitalizing the Department of Justice Task Force on Speculation that was started in July of 2011, and something the Department of Justice is indicating that it's going to begin doing immediately. And I share Professor Greensberger's sentiments with respect to the idea that if you shine light on the behavior of something, its behavior is likely to change. There is no reason not to begin that today. And I thank you very much for your time and attention and the opportunity to be here and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you both very, very much for really compelling testimony and the real clarity of thought and candor. We're much appreciative of that, and with that, let me recognize the ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Levin. I'm going to mention to my colleagues that we're going to hold firm to a 5-minute rule here in order to get everybody in to be able to ask their questions of our panelists today. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the fact that many of us are here is an indication that we may not be in session, but this Congress should really be so. And the Republicans, they support a free market even when it's rigged. And so we're here to try to probe this. So let me just ask you, because you make such a compelling case as to how much the speculation is, I think both of you have said essentially in terms of these derivatives, they may be 80% speculation and 20% response to a real need. So let me just ask you, assuming that's true and there's much evidence there is, how, if we ran the show, and I wish we did, how would we pass legislation that would get at the speculation but permit where there was an effort to hedge against an increase and take control of that product? That's the line you draw. How would we do this realistically? Because I think, though there may be some deaf ears here, we need to shout loudly and shout persuasively. So design a proposal that would get at this.
In 1934, Franklin Delano Roosevelt sent legislation to the New Deal Congress, which they passed, to protect farmers from excessive speculation. And essentially, the design is not to, the critical word is excessive speculation, not speculation. In fact, speculation is needed for the farmer, for the petroleum producer, to create liquid markets where contracts can be quickly traded. But a smooth functioning market is 70% commercial, 30% speculative. The markets now are 80% speculative, 20% commercial. The commercials don't want to be in this market anymore because it's so volatile. They have to place margin. They can't control the price of margin because the contract shoots up and their life savings may go in the margin. So this is all speculation. Now, the two vehicles that many agree, and I've provided all the studies on this, that the speculators use that are the quickest, dirtiest way to get into this market are the commodity index swap funds and the synthetic exchange traded funds. Don't worry about the fancy title. What does that mean? You walk in to your bank and say, I don't want to buy this stuff. I don't even know what a barrel of crude oil looks like. But your analysts have advised me that the price is going to go up. So here's my money, and I want to get dollar for dollar everything out of the upward price. And those Wall Street operations are like bookies. They have to hedge their exposure, just like a bookie lays off bets when it gets too one-sided. What do? They go into the real futures market where the farmer and the baker are trying to hedge prices, and they buy long oil contracts. So on paper, they have contracts that are 33 times the size of the world's supply of oil. That sends a signal out that cannot be defeated that there's a supply problem when there isn't. So you can cut this snake off at its head by saying no more betting on these markets. These aren't commercials making these bets. Unfortunately, I hate to tell you this, they're pension funds, private equity companies, hedge funds, banks. All they're doing is like walking into a bookie shop and saying, I don't want to own this stuff, I just want to bet. And by the way, you can only bet that the price will go up. You can't bet that it will go down.
Yeah, the losers of that bet are the American people.
The loser, and they are continuously told it's a supply-demand problem, when the people who are responsible for the oil markets, ExxonMobil, the CEO says $60 to $70 a barrel. It's 105, 110 now. The Saudi king says, you're worried about blocking the Straits of Hormuz? We'll make a barrel for barrel everything that will be lost. By the way, in 1973, when OPEC cut off the West from all its oil, worse than the blockage of the Straits of Hormuz, there was a fraction of the volatility we're seeing today, and I can give you charts to show that. In April of 2011, it was the Arab Spring. Libya, with 2% production of oil, is causing this spike. And Saudi said again, we'll make up the 2%. The president said, this is not supply demand, this is market manipulation. And he was right. So, and the final thing I would say is, what are you stopping here? Are you stopping money from going into production? Are you stopping money from people creating jobs? Unless you think a casino, which names like Goldman Sachs, job creators. No, you're stopping betting. That if we're wrong about this, if everything we're telling you is a mistake, what will we have done if we stopped the betting? We'll have closed a couple of casinos. Believe me, every time there has been a threat, 2008, you guys passed a bill 288 to 133 to stop the betting. The oil price went from 147 to 30 in 6 months. Is that a supply-demand responsibility? And then, when people said, we got the price down to 30, nothing happened, it shot back up to 75 by the spring of 2009. Then you guys said, well, we're going to pass Dodd-Frank. When Dodd-Frank appears not to be working because of Wall Street lobbying and Wall Street lawsuits, the price of oil is back up again. Stop the gambling. I can tell you, you will bring the price of oil down substantially, and all your constituents who are in heartbreaking situations, whether it's gasoline, heating oil, or any derivative crude oil, will find comfort, and we will keep the recovery going and make the United States what it is for the first time in decades, a leader in world economic growth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me ask my colleague, Mr. Cicilline from Rhode Island, to next question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for convening this meeting, and Madam Leader. This is an issue of great importance to my state. We have, Rhode Island has the second highest unemployment rate in the country, and families are really suffering with the increase in gas prices. To get to work, if they have work, to run their small businesses, to get their kids to school, and a whole host of other issues. And when you hear your testimony today and what we've seen so much in the research, that so much of this is driven by what sounds dangerously reminiscent of what we heard or were warned about in the mortgage derivative market, and the way that it brought our housing market to the brink of collapse and hurt so many families. The idea that this is repeating itself with the same speculators on Wall Street is really, really infuriating. And so thank you for your testimony. And my question is a very practical one. There is a piece of legislation that's been introduced on the Senate side by Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Klobuchar and Senator Franken that I have really looked at that seems to immediately require the CFTC, or within 14 days, to set about both identifying the magnitude of the speculation and also to set about addressing it immediately. And I'm wondering whether that approach makes sense, and whether the ratios that you're speaking about that are flipped upside down can be corrected, and what are the obstacles to that happening if that legislation were enacted by the Congress of the United States.
Well, let me say that legislation is the legislation that you people passed on June 26, 2008, when oil went to a world record price of $147, which was forcing the CFTC to declare an emergency in the market and hoping that they would limit speculation, both by flat limits on speculation and by increasing margins speculators have to pay. And so I think that's a good idea. But if you guys want to kill the beast, if you want to help your constituents, don't delegate this out to a opaque administrative process where Wall Streeters are meeting. By the way, the CFTC will meet with anybody, but the consumers don't have the money to go down there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they don't have the money to fight these things in court where the Wall Streeters are hiring the fanciest law firms, the biggest appellate firms, and I can tell you, and Gene Guilford can tell you, we cannot match that money dollar for dollar. So I say to you, don't ask the CFTC to do this. They're the very agency that you guys know don't have the funding for this. And I would do it yourself. You can pass legislation banning commodity index swaps and exchange-traded funds, and you will remove $500 trillion from the market. And they'll come to you, the banks will come to you and say, oh, you're going to limit production. You're going to limit liquidity. The market is overrun with liquidity. We have 80% of it is speculation. What you will be doing is stopping gambling, pure and simple. Money only creating homes in the Hamptons and yachts in the Hamptons. Your constituents should know that every time they break their heart by buying $4 and maybe soon $5 gasoline, that money isn't going into production. It's going to home building in the Hamptons and yacht building in the Hamptons. It is not a constructive economic thing. Don't stop anywhere but go to the jugular. And frankly, I'll tell you something. If that bill gets introduced, what is it going to say to the speculators? Hey, I'm going to have to get out of this market. I'm not going to get out before there's a panic and everybody's getting out. I'm going to unwind now. And that's what happened in 2008. You guys passed the bill 288 to 133. Senator Reid got 51 votes in a Senate where many Democrats were out campaigning for president. A lot of Republicans supported him. The speculators said to themselves, oh my God, these guys are serious. The price went from $147 in July to $30 in December, but then nothing happened.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Guilford, let me ask you to comment if you would.
I think that that the Senator's bill is a great way to start. I agree with Professor Greensberger. I think in context, remember that the Commodities Futures Trading Commissioner's position limits rule, at least initially, was designed to do exactly what we're talking about here today. Unfortunately, at least initially, its limits were set so extraordinarily high as to be not terribly effective. And it's going to take time for them in order to be able to collect the data necessary in order to make sure that they're setting the limits in the right place, in the right way, and to make sure that it is the most effective. That is exactly the administrative process that Professor Greensberger talks about that will take so long. And coupled with that, understand that the financial services industry has made it clear that it is going to litigate every single one of these rules that comes out of every single one of these agencies for as long as it takes to litigate them, because they know that they're playing for time. They're playing either for a time in the change of the presidency or a time in the change of the makeup of this Congress. Because their intentions are clear. Gut the agency's budget so that the laws can't be enforced. Litigate the issues as they come out of these agencies' rulemaking processes in order to make sure that it draws them out as long as possible. So I agree with Professor Greensberger. Banning things is a great way to start, and you have a unique opportunity to begin that conversation with the letter that several of your colleagues signed calling on the Agriculture Committee to begin holding hearings immediately. There isn't any reason why that can't be the centerpiece of exactly that conversation.
Ms. Edwards?
Thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses today. And I really appreciate that you've put into context what consumers are feeling. Most of us, barring a class or two in undergraduate school or otherwise, have no idea about market economics, about the commodities market, and about how that impacts things like the food that we buy and the gas that we put in our cars. So I appreciate that. And it was helpful to hear just a reminder about supply and demand and the relationship between supply and demand and what should be the price. As you stated, Professor Greensberger, supplies are up they're plentiful. Demand is down, and prices really should reflect that, and they simply don't. I filled up my tank a week and a half ago, and it was $4.04 a gallon. I filled up my tank after church on Sunday, this past Sunday, and it was $4.10 a gallon. That was just a week's time. And I hear the $10 billion, and I think, Mr. Guilford, people don't understand those numbers. They're just so incredible for those of us who haven't been privileged enough to win a lottery. So I wonder if you could tell me, in the $4.10 that I spent for a gallon of gas on Sunday, how much should I have paid for that gallon of gas?
That's a great,
little quick math.
That's a great question. If you follow the logic of much of the conversation that you've heard here today, and there are going to be widely differing opinions about the degree to which speculation in and of itself is contributing to this problem. You have a range of opinions from the chief executive officer of ExxonMobil, who contended that between $65 and $70 is the fair price. Everything over that is speculative. 2 weeks ago, you have the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis indicating that 15% is speculation. So even if you were to cut it down the middle, even if you were to just split the difference between the two, instead of spending $4, you should have been spending something closer to $3 for your gallon of gasoline. Now, $10 billion is a big number. So let me put it in the context that I think some may be more comfortable with. Congressman Larson is familiar with the people who work with me and at my school. I have a lady who is a single mother raising 2 children by herself. She has to come back and forth to work every day. In December, she was paying about $45 a week for gas. Now she's paying $70. You all worked very hard after the first of the year in what looked like an extraordinarily difficult task to give every working American a payroll tax cut. For that lady who works for me, raising those 2 children, all of the payroll tax cut that she received now goes into paying only to get her back and forth to work. So for whatever good intention you may have had in helping people like the people who I work with, it has now gone all entirely for the higher price of gasoline.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, because that really does say exactly what we're talking about. The single mother paying from what was $45 for a tank of gas, now paying $70, has effectively lost all of the tax increase that we provided for her at the beginning of the year. $4.10 a gallon, I've got to get that correct, that I paid on Sunday should have been about $3.10 a gallon, and that's what Americans are paying. So I really thank you very much for being able to help us understand the details, but to put it into real context in terms of what it's costing the American people. Thank you, and I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Scott?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. DeLauro, and thank you, Leader Pelosi and Mr. Larson and others for convening this meeting. Gas prices are complicated, and it's good to see some good information. Both of you have spoken about the legitimate futures market and speculation. That was one of the problems we had with the credit default swaps, where you had insuring against a loss in mortgages might be legitimate, but when you allow many people to bet on the same package of mortgages, that's just raw speculation. Now, we have centuries-old principles of insurance, and basically what you're buying is insurance, and there are 2 fundamental principles. One, if you sell insurance, you have to have assets to back up your promise. And the second is you can only buy insurance where you have an insurable interest. I can't buy fire insurance on your house. And what they were doing is letting dozens of people buy fire insurance on your house. And so when you have the loss of a house, all of a sudden you unload all these losses. Exactly how much of this speculation problem could be cured if we went back to just fundamental principles of insurance and required, before you start selling insurance, that you can only sell it to people with
but a good job on, because you had people like John Paulson who placed bets that tranches of subprimes that he didn't own would fail. He made $4 billion in 2007 betting that people would be kicked out of their houses without having lent any of the money to those people. By the way, the European Union, we did not in Dodd-Frank just say stop the gambling. We've said make it transparent so that everybody can see it, and that'll be therapeutic. But the European Union, in the European sovereign debt crisis, Angela Merkel and Mr. Sarkozy got the European Commission to say people were betting that southern European countries would fail without having lent them any money. They had a synthetic bet that they would fail, and the European Commission said, stop.
But if they had lent the money, they would be legitimate to try to protect against the loss.
They did, but they don't want to lend the money.
Well, that's why the insurable interest would be the hedge.
That's exactly right. And ironically, as Dodd-Frank was working its way through, God knows how this happened, insurance commissioners were meeting in Florida to say credit default swaps are insurance, and they're insuring somebody else's risk. Since 1806, when Parliament said you can't do that because people were insuring cargoes on British ships and then calling the French Navy to bomb the ships and collecting the insurance, they didn't own the cargoes. Parliament put a stop to that. The insurance commissioners want to put a stop to that. Suddenly, within Dodd-Frank, God knows how it happened, insurance law, state insurance law was preempted.
Well, should we go back to that, where we insist on an insurable interest?
Yes, you should, but frankly, what I would do is consider what the European Union did on that front as well. And what I'm telling you today, the gambling on whether Greece will fall without lending money to Greece is not a productive investment. It's a destructive investment. The European Commission said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So I wouldn't just say you got to insure your own interest. I just say stop this. But your approach would be good. The final point I just say, we've got a different problem in this market. This is pure and simple going into a bookie shop and saying, I want to bet on the upward direction.
When there's no insurable interest.
There's no insurable interest.
Let me ask another quick question before time runs out, and that is whether or not we're making enough use out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, whether or not we ought to increase it, use it more, not just on catastrophic national security problems, but more generally for price stability.
I think that, first, to go back to your earlier question, if I could just very briefly, I think what you're trying to get to, if I understand your question correctly, is that those who have an interest in the actual delivery of or can take delivery of the materials that are being transacted in these markets ought to be the ones who are the participants in these markets. And going back to the material that I read to you from one of the promotional items from Wall Street, what they're promoting are people who will never take delivery of anything, nor will they deliver anything into these markets. They are merely placing bets on the daily movement of the prices of these commodities. And for those of us who are in heating oil country, for example, that some of you are here on this panel, it means that instead of a local heating oil retailer of the type that we represent, who goes into the marketplace and buys contracts so that that retailer can turn around to consumers and offer consumers a fixed price or a capped price plan for the winter. He's buying his contract, or she's buying her contract on the market, and is taking advantage of the options that are available in order to stabilize his or her price. As these are being inflated constantly and churned constantly, it is costing more and more money for these small retailers to be able to engage in these transactions, which means it's costing consumers more money. So what Professor Greensberger is talking about is to be able to puncture this bubble and bring these prices down. With respect to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, I guess I can be counted as among those, because it was a year ago February, actually, that I was in Representative DeLauro's office as we were working on the statement in anticipation of military action in Libya about the President's announcement for the potential release of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at that time. And it indeed is strategic when you use it for that purpose. You announce your intention You announce your intention, much like what Professor Greensberger was talking about when he said that it can have a huge prophylactic effect on this marketplace if the Department of Justice were to announce that it was going to undertake a massive and serious investigation of what is going on in these markets. The threat of that alone is a huge sword of Damocles over the neck of Wall Street. Added to that, the threat, and that's what we were talking about a year ago, Representative DeLauro, a year ago was the threat that the United States was willing to do whatever was necessary in conjunction with our allies to make sure that an adequate amount of crude oil was available in the marketplace each day, including but not limited to the use of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve if that became necessary. That threat is an incredibly important weapon that's available to you. Understanding that we don't have a problem with a shortage of crude oil today. If you were to go to Cushing, Oklahoma, if you'd have gone with the President when he visited there last week, Cushing, Oklahoma is awash in crude oil. There is no problem with the physical supply of the product. None whatsoever.
Okay. Mr. Moran.
Cycle. It's occurred with gold, with basically, orange juice, everything. It would seem that there must be some people, the John Paulsons of the world, if you would, that are looking for opportunities to buy puts or to sell short swaps, ready to, again, gain the volatility of the market. Or is there a uniqueness to this market? So, but I'd like to hear from both.
Well, I mean, this is a bubble, and the bubble will burst. The last big bubble went from 147 to 30 in 6 months, but nobody saw that coming. Goldman was predicting oil would be at 200 when it was at 30. But I got to tell you something. We don't know when the bubble will burst. In the meantime, as we've said, people are spending money they probably don't even have, or not buying medicine they need, or not paying their rent to pay for gas. Right. That could trigger a recession. That could, if we don't have TARP and the Fed window, which I don't think politically we can have the next time, we're told by economists that could be a depression. So when the bubble bursts, we may already be flat on our back. Right. The fact that gasoline is down to $1.50, let's say, may mean nothing if we've got unemployment up to 15, 16, 17%.
Well, I agree with you. Clearly, the Congress needs to take action, although just between us and the cameras, that's not going to happen as long as the majority in the House of Representatives are owned by the extractive industries. I want to ask you another question, though, because we have a figure here that says that for every penny more we pay at the pump, the profits for the 5 largest oil companies go up by $200 million. Is there any kind of collusion going on? I mean, we got a credible figure from the head of ExxonMobil, but they are profiting, are they not, from this speculation? So it's all good for them. And, of course, when the price per barrel drops, the prices at the pump are not going to drop proportionately. They're going to keep a larger and larger share. That's what's happened every time. Their profits go up as prices go down.
By July, it was 147. By November, it had fallen to 30. By the next March, it was back at 70. That's an extraordinary roller coaster to put a $17 trillion economy through. What? 70 to 147 to 30 to 70. Now, no one with a straight face, Representative Moran, could look at you in the eye and tell you, that's India, that's China. We had some extraordinary weather event. No, we didn't. There was some interference in the marketplace that was posing such an extraordinary circumstance that it needed to go to 147 by July. What could possibly the supply and demand fundamentals? It would be almost as though someone were to say to you, everyone in China and India decided to drive their car in July, that drove it up, and then they parked their cars by the fall, and that's why it went down. I mean, truly, it's absurd. Now, with respect to your question about profits, first of all, every single day that you hear a report on the news about what happens on the commodity markets, every single day, by that evening, for publication the next morning, The commodity market movements get translated into what happens on the physical markets, the wholesale prices that our people pay. They follow almost in lockstep. So there is no question that what goes on Wall Street has a direct causal effect on ultimately what is made by virtue of what is charged to the general public in the price of the products that they pay. It's absolutely the case. There is a direct causal relationship between the commodity markets and the prices charged in the physical markets. We watch them every day. And the absurdity of some of this, shouldn't be lost on anyone, and I'll pick on heating oil again. We just came through a heating oil season where we had virtually no winter, right? Representative Markey? We had no winter up home. None whatsoever. Golf courses were open all winter long. It was extraordinary. The measurement of cold that we use, which are degree days, was down by 25%. The volumes that were sold by your heating oil retailers were down by a third. It's extraordinary. I mean, an extraordinary weather event. Then why, under those circumstances, would the commodity cost of heating oil today be $3.22? You can't give away heating oil. You can't. It was 70 degrees in most of February, for God's sakes. Now we're talking about a crack spread, the difference between the price of a barrel of crude and the price of a barrel of heating oil. The price of a barrel of crude is $104. The price of a barrel of heating oil is $135. Now, why would there be such a huge premium for a product that no one's using because it's 70 degrees? It defies logic for anyone to say it's supply and demand. And to your point, Representative Markey, in the remarks that you made in your opening statement, for the first time since Harry Truman was president, the United States has become a net exporter of refined petroleum products. Extraordinary. Most people think that we're a net importer of everything. Our crude imports are under 50%, and we make so much of the refined products that we use that we have enough of it to export to foreign markets. And the heating oil commodity cost is $3.22 in a season with no winter. And the price of a gallon of gasoline on the gasoline contract on the NYMEX has gone up 92 cents between the middle of December and the end of March, at a time when Americans last year reduced their consumption of gasoline 2.5% and have reduced it by an amount more than at any time since World War II, just over the last 3 years in the economic contraction. If there is anything that underscores what Professor Greensberger has said today about what the actions that you should take in these markets, it is that the fundamentals of supply and demand do not seem to count. Americans have sacrificed. They have sacrificed, and they're not getting the benefit of it.
Compelling insight. Thank you.
I'm sorry if I took your...
Extraordinary. I'd like to now recognize the Vice Chair of our Democratic Caucus, Mr. Javier Becerra.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Leader, and I join with all my colleagues in saying thank you very much for being here. By the way, in California, we're paying well more than $4 a gallon for gas. So we're paying upwards of $4.50 and more for regular gasoline in Los Angeles. Gentlemen, we've seen this movie before, and it wasn't very good the first time. We saw it with the so-called Enron energy crisis in the early to mid-2000s. We saw it, as you mentioned before, with this housing bubble in the late 2000s and what happened with the Wall Street meltdown. And so I think we hear you loud and clear, but there's still folks out there who are saying, no, it's not speculation. No, it's not what you're saying. So let me give you another chance. Is there another explanation for the steep increase in petroleum prices today? Is there anyone out there in the world that has some credibility who's saying it's something other than speculators?
It is in many people's financial interest to propagate, which is a logical thing. But people who don't know the markets, you would think if the price is going up like this, it must be supply demand. That's what we were all taught in Economics 101. We didn't know in Economics 101 that these markets would become gambling casinos. And that's what's happened now. Now, there may be some worry about the Straits of Hormuz. There may be some transportation problems that are causing this. But I will tell you, it didn't go from 147 to 30 accidentally. The House of Representatives passed the bill 288 to 133 to stop gambling. Senator Reid, by the way, also, you keep saying we should have hearings. In June 26, 2008, the leadership brought a bill to the floor that was introduced that day that passed 402 to 19 that night. Senator Reid didn't wait in 2008 to go through hearings. He introduced in his own name a bill that got 51 votes to stop gambling. He couldn't invoke cloture, but if he kept fighting, if the price had stayed up, he might have invoked cloture. Now, that's just one more thing I want to say. For the people who are saying the Republicans, we will never get their support, I will tell you, when gasoline goes up, we've gotten their support before.
Well, and let us work on that, because I think it's absolutely true that it's almost impossible these days in the House of Representatives to get a hearing, to have you officially testify, to essentially convey what you've just announced today, and that is that it's principally due to speculation. But let me make sure, because I don't want to walk away from this hearing and have someone say to me, there's some credible folks out there who are saying it's simply supply and demand. Is there anyone out there that you know who says that we have a supply problem, we don't have enough production? And I don't want to go into the dynamics of this and marketing 101. Is there any? I just want a name. Is there anyone I can turn to find out where this person is coming from to say that there's a supply problem?
I think, in honesty, we have to say that there are people. There's a guy named Craig Perrong, who's a professor in one Texas university. I know a professor at the London School of Economics. But if you wait, it's like a 60 to 2 or 3.
Okay. Is there anyone saying that there's a demand problem, that we just increased our consumption? And Mr. Guilford, you just mentioned that we've actually seen the demand drop.
Absolutely. And to that point, there was a great story in the news that when I get home I'll forward over to you and other members of the committee, where there was a news story, and I forget which one of the news services it was, but the Department of Energy is the one that produces these statistics. And the headline was, Americans reduce gasoline consumption. Wall Street doesn't believe it. So at some point, I guess you could have a debate with someone about whether the statistics are right or wrong. But the fact of the matter is, and I think that this is borne out by whether it's the MasterCard figures on credit card purchases, or whether it's the Department of Energy, or whether it's even the American Petroleum Institute statistics on gasoline, very clearly over the last few years, Americans have decreased their consumption of gasoline. So it is not a demand problem. Now, there may be some areas of the country where there are dislocations of product from time to time. There's no questions about that. But
let me ask one last question.
Overall, no.
By the way, Mr. Guilford, I was interested to see your background of, you're not coming from some left-wing think tank. If I understand this correctly, you served under President Reagan for a time, did you not?
That's right. I was Chief of Staff to General Counsel of the Department of Energy for a while, and notwithstanding that, I really appreciate you letting me in the room today.
We thank you for being here and for your testimony. And may I ask just last question? So who the heck is pocketing this $10 billion a month that Americans are having to pay for overpriced gasoline? Where is it going?
Well, in the quarterly reports, you're going to learn that information, I think, because there's no question that the profitability of those who refine gasoline and who market it throughout the country are going to be benefiting from this. There's no question about that. Everyone knows that. Also, those who are making these investments in these gasoline contracts are also profiting really rather handsomely. And I think if you pay very close attention to what goes on between Wall Street and the physical markets, and I think this is an incredibly important thing for the Commodities Futures Trading Commission to be paying attention to, because it's not all just about the commodities markets. It's also about the relationship between commodities and physical markets and how one drives the other. You'll find that the American people are paying a very hefty bill for what's going on.
Thank you both for your testimony.
I just got to quickly add, it's also Wall Street, too. Wall Street's getting, this is how they make their money. And there are two things that are getting at them indirectly. One is the so-called Volcker rule, which means they can't trade these contracts for their own book. They have to be an intermediary. And there's the Fed, interestingly enough, who's clearly learned their lesson from the 2008 meltdown, is telling these banks, get out of commodities. Get out of commodities. You're not buying oil. You're not selling oil. Finally, with regard to the physical markets, In 2008, the largest holder of heating oil in New England was Morgan Stanley. Now, if you can drive the price up through the futures market, you're going to want to buy the physical. And you're not going to want to sell the physical because it's like an appreciating asset. Why let the American consumer have it? Let's keep it until we hit the bubble peak.
Thank you both of you.
And that's correct. The largest supplier of heating oil in New England is Morgan Stanley. It's not an oil company. So even though some of you may like to talk about big oil, it's actually big Wall Street that's controlling most of our heating oil.
It's, wow, revelation after revelation. With that, let me ask for questioning my colleague from Massachusetts, who is the ranking member on the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yep. Climate change. New England's temperatures in the winter are now 4 degrees warmer than they were in 1970. We now have Philadelphia's weather from 1970. People for opening day for the Red Sox are now planning on which short sleeve shirt they're going to wear rather than which combination of sweaters and flannel shirts they're going to wear, which is a big change from past years. But it reflects this downward pressure on home heating oil. But let's be honest, okay? The price of home heating oil just somehow or other was unaffected by the market this winter.
That's correct.
And people in New England and all across the country just got tipped upside down by Morgan Stanley. So let's go to what's happened in this market since 2002. We had Dennis Kelleher from Better Markets testify before the Natural Resources Committee 2 weeks ago, and here's what he told us: that in 2002, 11% of this oil market was controlled by speculators, and 89% controlled by airlines, trucking firms, shippers, who had to basically place bets to protect themselves. Now, in 2012, it's 63% are speculators, and only 37% are truckers and shippers and airlines, putting them at the mercy of Morgan Stanley in terms of ensuring that this oil product is sold and that the law of supply and demand, in fact, is abided by. Is this the heart of the issue right here? That the people who are now owning these oil products have no stake in ensuring that the price goes anywhere but up, and they'll hold it because there's never a physical transfer. They just hold it because all it is for them is cash. Do you agree with that, Mr. Guilford?
Yes,
is that what held New England hostage this winter and people all across the country?
Yes, I agree with that, absolutely. And I think that under any supply and demand scenario, Representative Markey, given the weather that we had at home, and just parenthetically, since I'm a Red Sox fan, we're worried about who's going to be pitching, not the clothes we're wearing. But back to Morgan Stanley for a second.
Opening day against Detroit, too.
We're opening against Detroit.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to start a Major League Baseball war. I'm sorry. To the point of anyone's rational concept of supply and demand, when you have a one-third decrease in a demand for your product, and supply is adequate for the market based on imputed demand, it defies imagination that anyone who ever took an Econ 101 class would look at that circumstance and say that the price should do anything other than go down.
So you don't have to be Dick Tracy to figure out why Wall Street is taking the CFTC and all the Dodd-Frank rules to court.
Right.
They want to stop putting a cop on the beat. They want to make sure that these regulations aren't there so that they can kind of corner the market and create artificial volatility in that market.
That's
so
correct.
That's the easy connection. Morgan Stanley controls the market. They then go to court to make sure that the Wall Street's regulations that Dodd-Frank put on the books aren't implemented, and they say to the Republicans in Congress, don't put the $100 million worth of extra cops on the beat to go out there to scare the living daylight out of these scam artists. Pretty simple. You could summarize this, nefarious activity in that simple form. And let me go to a couple of pieces of information that came out actually today. One, according to the Energy Information Agency, the United States crude oil inventories increased 16 million barrels over the last 2 weeks. Inventory of oil in the United States went up 16 million barrels in the last 2 weeks, but the price of a gallon of gasoline went up 7 cents a gallon.
That's right.
Now, there seems to be a little disconnect there
Monday night.
in the market. And this morning, the Department of Energy announced that U.S. crude oil production last week rose 228,000 barrels per day to 6 million barrels per day altogether, the highest oil production since 1998. So you have those two combos, higher production, more oil in reserves, and the price of gasoline went up 7 cents over the last 2 weeks. So why would that happen unless Morgan Stanley and the other scam artists aren't out there trying to manipulate the market to keep it high so that they can reap short-term profits at the expense of our economy and at the expense of ordinary consumers? Do you agree with that summary, Mr. Guilford?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Professor?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me then, Professor, let me just go through this litany that you want us to go through. One, you want the $100 million for the CFTC, and you want to make sure that the Republicans can't cut $30 million from the CFTC budget so that the cops are on the beat. Is that right?
That's right. I would add a footnote, because you're also proposing a transaction tax. The Fed does not come to you every year and ask for money. They get money from the banks. The CFTC should have, frankly, $100 million is the limit. It should be
100. Did I say 100?
Yeah, but there's a $100 million difference between what they're getting and what President Obama wants to give them.
They're getting 205. They need to get 308.
Well, my view is they should get 408.
Well,
because they need cops on the beat.
That's what they've asked for.
303 is already $100 million, and Mr. Guilford's talking about the consumer being billed $10 billion because there are no cops on the beat.
And again, Professor, if you could, you want the Justice Department to begin the investigation, announce that you think it'll have an immediate impact on the market. That's very important. And on the question of banning specific investment vehicles, name the vehicles you want to have banned right now.
Commodity index swaps and synthetic exchange-traded funds.
And how much money do you think that'll take out of the market?
Probably at least $500 billion.
$500 billion. That's the gambling money that's in the system. You take that out, and we'll see the drop in oil prices and home heating oil prices.
And let me just say, any of those three things, there'll be a drop. The three of them together, you will cut the head of the snake off forever.
Okay, and you agree with that,
yes, absolutely.
Mr. Guilford,
yes,
all the way that we'll have that impact almost immediately?
Absolutely.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Markey. Mr. Larson.
Listen, I just want to thank our witnesses, and this has been extraordinarily informative. It's always good to hear you again, Professor, and
thank you.
I have the benefit of the wisdom and knowledge of Gene Guilford, but I especially want to thank you. And there's a tendency in hearings like this not to bring it down to how it really impacts a mother of two. And I especially, Mr. Guilford, thank you for that scenario. It's those compelling stories that bring home the issue to everyday Americans in terms of both where the problem is and the impact that this has, and then how we go about doing it. In the case of home heating oil as well, with prices, as noted in New England, at a record low ever, to see no change, in fact, to see the prices of home heating oil for the consumer go up. This is what it's all about at the end of the day, and we can't thank you enough for your testimony and also for backing up what we think is an important agenda to accomplish in the United States Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. I'm going to try to get three things very quickly. Sorry, with quick answers, if I can, because we're coming to the 3:30 mark. Professor Greensberger, you started to allude to this. Every president since Ronald Reagan has proposed offsetting the cost of the CFTC operations with a collection of user fees. We have legislation that's out there at the moment to authorize that. I do, other colleagues have. A question for you, a quick answer, Professor Greenberg and Mr. Guilford. Would a small user fee impose any real burden on market participants?
the market is that CFTC's market has increased from a $40 trillion notional value market to $300 trillion notional value market. If you took a little bit of that, it would not be noticed at all, but Wall Street will not give an inch on that. Even if it's a nickel, they don't want to give the American consumer a nickel.
So it would not be a burden on the markets, in your view.
Mr.
Guilford?
You're talking about a couple of pennies per transaction.
Okay.
I mean, it's almost infinitesimal. It's so small because there are such a large number of transactions.
Well, they don't, but that would alleviate the problem in terms of the funding, and that would be beyond the appropriation that we deal with, so forth. But it would alleviate the funding problem for the CFTC to be able to do their job. Professor Greensberger, again, quickly, do current market conditions warrant the use of CFTC's current emergency authority to set margin and position limits to curb excessive speculation in the oil markets?
Yes. But remember, the CFTC, which is heroic in its efforts, is being starved to death. Go to the head. That's why the president was so smart. Got an interagency task force. Get the FBI married with the brains of a starved agency. So that would be my answer.
And that's the authority they have had, and they have not used in about the last 30 years.
But they're understaffed, as you know. I'd like to get more direct and hit it harder.
Just quickly, relief to consumers once the definition of a swap is finalized. And what concern do you both have with regard to the lawsuits filed to prevent the rule?
I'm very worried the lawsuit is going to kill whatever Dodd-Frank did. Dodd-Frank set the ship right. The hearing, those who attended it, I didn't, but I heard from people I respect who did not go well, and it was in front of a judge who probably is going to be objective. As you know, the D.C. Circuit has already upended the first Dodd-Frank provision it had in front of it.
With that, I'm going to turn this over to the leader for a close, but I want to echo my colleagues. I want to thank my colleagues for their time and the questions. Particularly thank you for what has been an unbelievable, revealing hearing on what are very, very technical issues, as my colleague Mr. Larson said, but allowing, and I'll speak for myself, to understand clearly what is going on. I wish we could take you all on the road and let the American people hear from you about what is going on. I think it would be critical to do that. I thank you for that, for the clarity, for the candor, and for your commitment to the American public and to the American consumer at an unbelievably disastrous times economically in their lives. They are really on life support, and addressing this issue is crucial to their economic well-being. Many, many thanks for your contribution today, Madam Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you for bringing us together, to you and to Chairman Larson for bringing forth these excellent witnesses to shed light on an issue of great significance to all of the American people. All of our members, as I said to you earlier, when we're out of session and so many members are present for a hearing, it speaks to the urgency of the matter and the expectation of excellence that we have from all of you, which was certainly realized. When I began my remarks, I talked about the agony and the ecstasy, the agony being the consumer at the pump and the ecstasy being the oil companies, but it is clear, recognizing that they've made $137 billion in profits last year, $261,000 a minute. But it's clear that some of that ecstasy is shared by speculators, excessive speculators on Wall Street. And this is a very big deal. And when I rudely injected that they don't want, it may be about the nickel and maybe it's about the money, but I think it's more about they don't want these supervision that additional money will bring. But this is a very valuable hearing. And again, our wish would be that the full House of Representatives in a bipartisan way would have such a hearing, listen to what you have to say, the answers that you are supplying to us, the documentation of the challenge that we have. But having said that, we are pleased that this is a matter of public record, that you stand to be an intellectual resource to us on this issue, to the Congress on this issue, and the range of opinion is from Dr. Greensberger in his academic world to Dr. Guilford, who served the Reagan administration in more than one capacity. So the validity that you bring to it is wide-ranging, and we are most grateful. Again, I thank my colleagues, our distinguished ranking member on the Natural Resources Committee, lives this, breathes this every day, and he has spoken so highly of what your testimony would be. Again, thank you. And thank you again, Congresswoman DeLauro, for your leadership.
Thank you, and the hearing.
Sure. Thank you.